It wasn't supposed to get this loud, not this fast. One moment, it was just another race weekend. The next, the entire NASCAR garage was at war over one name, Cleetus McFarland. And the first shot came from Kyle Busch. He didn't hesitate. He didn't soften it. He looked at Cleetus's racing record, a few ARCA starts, a rough Truck Series debut at Daytona, where he lasted just 5 laps, and then he said something that spread through the garage like wildfire. My 10-year-old son has more racing experience than Cleetus McFarland. Let that sink in. Not a critique, not a concern, a direct hit. And that one line didn't just criticize Cleetus, it gave permission. Permission for the rest of the garage to pile on. Because suddenly, it wasn't just Busch anymore. Kyle Petty stepped in, declaring that internet personalities like Cleetus simply do not belong on the same track as professional stock car drivers. Then came Bubba Wallace's veteran spotter, Freddie Kraft, throwing shots online and pointing back to that Daytona crash like it was proof of something much bigger. And just like that, the narrative was locked in, cemented, stamped, and distributed across every corner of the sport. This guy does not belong here. Not whispered, not debated, declared. But then came Rockingham, April 4th. The North Carolina Education Lottery, 250. Cleetus straps into the number 33 car for Richard Childress Racing. A real team, a legendary team. The kind of opportunity that drivers spend their entire careers chasing and most never get. The stage is set, the eyes are watching, the critics are waiting. And what happens? He qualifies 35th. Gets hit with a speeding penalty in Stage 3, loses control of the car more than once, finishes 32nd, 6 laps down. On paper, it looked exactly like the critics predicted. Even during the broadcast, Kyle Petty joked that Cleetus had found parts of Rockingham that no other driver had ever seen before. Freddie Kraft didn't hold back either, pointing to a risky 3-wide move on lap 3 as yet another glaring example of inexperience. And then NASCAR made it official. No Talladega, not yet. Cleetus McFarland was not approved to race there. At this point, the story should have been over, right? Critics proven right. Experiment concluded. Case closed. Move on. But that's not what happened. Because that's when Richard Childress spoke up, and everything changed. He didn't dodge it. He didn't play neutral. He didn't give a careful, PR-polished answer designed to please everyone. He looked at the entire situation, the backlash, the mockery, the pile-on, and said exactly what he thought. He said some of the drivers are beating Cleetus up, and that it's a little excessive. A little excessive. Those words coming from Richard Childress aren't just an opinion. This is a man who built championship teams from the ground up. A man who worked alongside Dale Earnhardt. A man who has seen everything this sport has to offer over 5 decades. When he speaks, the garage listens whether they want to or not. That wasn't just a defense of Cleetus McFarland. That was a warning. And then Childress reminded everyone of something they had conveniently forgotten in all the noise. Cleetus is a rookie, not a veteran, not a polished development league graduate, a rookie. He even pointed out that Cleetus had already finished 4th in an ARCA race, that he had been putting in the work, that he didn't just roll out of bed one morning and show up at a NASCAR track expecting a trophy. But then Childress said the part that nobody expected. He said the reason some drivers are going so hard at Cleetus, the real reason, underneath all the talk about safety and experience and belonging, is jealousy. Let that land for a second. Jealousy. According to Richard Childress, one of the most respected and credible voices in the entire history of NASCAR, the backlash isn't purely about skill or safety, it's about attention. It's about the uncomfortable reality that one YouTuber walked into the sport and instantly started generating more buzz, more eyeballs, and more conversation than drivers who have been grinding through the ranks for years without ever seeing that kind of spotlight. And here's the part that makes the critic's position genuinely uncomfortable. The numbers back him up. That Rockingham race, the race where Cleetus struggled, got penalized, and finished 30-second ratings went up 12%. Viewership jumped 11%. Think about what that means. In an era where NASCAR is fighting tooth and nail for every single viewer, where the sport has spent years trying to attract younger audiences and keep its numbers from slipping, one appearance by Cleetus McFarland moved the needle by double digits. That's not spin. That's not optimism. That is cold, hard, undeniable reality. And Richard Childress saw this coming before anyone else did. When the idea was first brought to him through Ty Dillon, He didn't just see a driver, he saw a pipeline. Because Cleetus McFarland isn't only a racer, he's a platform. Nearly 5 million subscribers on YouTube, millions of passionate fans who follow everything he does with cars, engines, and machines. And Childress laid it out simply, if even 10% of those fans start watching NASCAR, that's a massive wave of new energy flooding into a sport that desperately needs it. New fans, younger fans, different fans. Exactly the kind NASCAR has been chasing for years without knowing how to reach them. So the question stops being just does Cleetus belong and becomes something far more important. Can NASCAR afford to ignore what he brings? And Cleetus himself? He didn't back down, not even for a second. When the criticism was at its absolute peak, when the garage was loudest, when the mockery was sharpest, he spoke up and dropped a line that stopped people cold. He said if Richard Childress called any of those drivers criticizing him and offered them a ride, every single one of them would have taken it. Every single one. No hesitation, no conditions, and deep down, in the part of the garage nobody talks about out loud, everyone knows it's true. Because opportunities like that don't come around twice in a lifetime. So now, the garage is split cleanly, clearly, right down the middle. On one side, you have the purists, the veterans, the ones who believe experience should be earned the hard way, mile by mile, year by year, series by series. The ones who came up through the system and don't understand why someone should be allowed to skip it. On the other side, you have reality, attention, growth. New fans walking through a door that's been slowly closing for years and suddenly swinging wide open. And right in the middle of all of it, one name that refuses to disappear. Cleetus McFarland. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody in the garage can comfortably explain, because the loudest critics aren't the only voices that matter anymore. There's another layer to this, a quieter one, a more complicated one, because even the people who don't fully agree with Cleetus being out there aren't tearing him down the way others are. Take Dale Earnhardt Jr. This is someone whose opinion carries genuine weight in every corner of this sport. A driver, a champion, a voice that fans and competitors alike actually respect. And when he looked at Cleetus McFarland's performance at Rockingham, he didn't ignore the mistakes. He acknowledged them honestly. But then he said something that cut clean through all the noise. I know he busted his rear a couple of times, but to do what he did was really phenomenal. Phenomenal. Not perfect, not polished, phenomenal. That word matters more than people realize, because it shifts the entire lens. It's no longer just about results. It's about effort. It's about stepping into one of the most demanding racing environments in the world, under a blinding spotlight, with the entire garage expecting you to embarrass yourself and still showing up completely, still giving everything you have. Dale Jr. didn't pile on. He didn't mock. He coached. He explained to Cleetus just how tricky the Rockingham surface is, how the tire wear, the track conditions, and the setup demands make it one of the genuinely toughest venues on the entire schedule. Even seasoned veterans struggle there. That's the difference between the two sides of this debate. One is throwing punches, the other is trying to build something. And that contrast says everything you need to know about where this sport is headed. Now, zoom out for just a moment, because sitting right in the center of all this arguing, all this ego, all this noise, is a number that nobody in that garage can dismiss. 12%. That's how much the ratings jumped. 11%. That's how much viewership increased. And not for Daytona, not for Talladega, not for one of NASCAR's crown jewel events with decades of history behind it. For a regular Saturday race at Rockingham, that suddenly became must-see television because one guy was in the field. So now ask yourself this: what happens when Cleetus McFarland gets approved for Talladega? What happens when he lines up at Daytona, on one of the sport's biggest stages, with the whole country watching? If Rockingham moved the needle like that with relatively little mainstream buildup, what does a superspeedway do? Because that's the part nobody wants to say out loud in the garage right now. This isn't just a racing debate anymore. It stopped being that a while ago. This is a business reality. NASCAR needs fans. It needs younger viewers. It needs people who didn't grow up watching stock cars on Sunday afternoons to suddenly find a reason to care. And whether the garage accepts it or resists it, Cleetus is doing exactly that. Bringing in people who weren't watching before, making them curious, making them stay, making them care. And that creates a deeply uncomfortable truth for the drivers who have been speaking the loudest. Because if this sport grows because of him, if the numbers keep climbing every time he gets behind the wheel, then what exactly does that say about the criticism? What does it say about the people who led the charge? Now, to be fair, and this genuinely matters, the critics aren't completely wrong. Experience does matter in this sport. Rockingham proved that. The speeding penalty, the loose car, the difficulty maintaining control, those aren't minor issues you can brush aside. At higher speeds, at tracks like Talladega where cars run inches apart at 200 miles per hour, those same mistakes don't just cost positions. They can become genuinely dangerous for everyone on the track. And NASCAR made the right call in holding him back from Talladega for now. That part of the conversation isn't controversial. What is controversial, what has gone too far, is the leap from he needs more experience to he doesn't belong in this sport at all. That's the line Richard Childress is drawing, and he's not moving off it. Because from his perspective, this isn't an insult to NASCAR. It isn't a threat to the sport's integrity or its standards. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to grow, to evolve, to bring in a new generation of fans without erasing or replacing the old one. And the truth that nobody in that garage can honestly argue against is this: NASCAR has always changed. New drivers, new personalities, new eras rising and fading and rising again. That has always been the nature of this sport. This is just another version of that evolution. But this time it's happening faster, louder, and with millions of eyes already locked in before the green flag even drops. And that's precisely what makes people so uncomfortable. Because Kyle Busch's line about his 1-0-year-old son, yeah, it was sharp. It was funny in the moment. It got attention, but it also revealed something sitting just beneath the surface of this whole debate. It showed just how threatened some corners of the garage feel by someone who didn't come up through the same system, didn't follow the same path, didn't pay the same dues, and yet is somehow commanding more spotlight than most full-time drivers see across an entire season. And that's not something you fix with better lap times. You can't erase it with a single good finish or a clean run on a Sunday afternoon. That's something structural, something deeper. Because attention in today's world is power. Real, tangible, undeniable power. And right now, Cleetus McFarland has a lot of it. So where does this all go from here? Richard Childress already answered that question. This isn't over. More races are coming. More laps, more learning, more chances to prove the critics right or to prove them wrong in the most public way possible. Either way, it isn't stopping. And if those ratings keep moving every time Cleetus gets behind the wheel, the same voices that have been loudest in their criticism are going to find themselves in a very awkward position, not just disagreeing with the direction of the sport, but being wrong, loudly, publicly, repeatedly. And the garage is going to have to make a choice. Keep fighting it or accept that the sport is changing right in front of them, whether they invited it or not. Because one thing is already clear. Cleetus McFarland isn't going anywhere. Richard Childress made sure of that. So now the only question left, the one that nobody in that garage has a clean answer to, is whether NASCAR is truly ready for what comes next. Or whether this is just the beginning of a much bigger fight.